Welcome, everyone. Thank you. Happy Friday Eve. Um, I'm having some issues with my slides, so if you just give me one moment. But thank you so much for joining us. All right, we should be able to see my slides now. All right, we're up and running. Oops. All right, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday Eve. And thank you for joining us for the Pay by Enrollment Voucher Update webinar. This webinar is presented by Brighter Futures Indiana. Brighter Futures Indiana is a website powered by Early Learning Indiana, launched in 2018 as a public-private partnership with the Office of Early Childhood and Out-of-School Learning. It provides families, providers, and communities with guidance about finding and delivering high-quality childcare in Indiana. On the Brighter Futures website, there are several resources under the program section that may be useful to you. First, we have the Emerging Provider Experience, which is an interactive tool that walks emerging providers through each step of opening their own childcare business. The last phase, called the Grow phase, could be useful to you as you think about PTQ, accreditation, expanding your program, and professional development. There is also a marketing guide on Brighter Futures to help to publicize your program on social media, as well as free resources linked in the guide. Finally, I'm sure you spend a considerable amount of time in iLead. If you ever get stuck navigating the platform as you are registering for trainings or updating your program information, please check out iLead help articles on Brighter Futures. These will help you problem solve on your own. My name is Sarah Mihich, and I will be your host today. As your host, I'm available to help troubleshoot any technology issues as we go along. Please use the Q&A feature to let us know. Your presenters this afternoon will be Shannon from Aura Castle, and you will also see support from Michaela and Jennifer in the Q&A box. Because this is a webinar, attendee microphones and cameras are turned off, but we still encourage you to stay engaged. Please share your questions using the Q&A feature at any time, and we'll address them during designated points in the presentation. This session will be recorded and be available on Aura Castle's website after today. Again, thank you for joining us this evening. I will turn it over to Shannon to get us started.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of OE Castle, I'd like to welcome you all here today. Thank you for giving up part of your evening to learn some of the things about pay by enrollment that we have updated. So we do have a very full agenda as well as a pretty big crowd here and a lot of information to go through. So we're just going to dive right in. As Sarah mentioned, this is being recorded and I will send out the slides and the links that we have shared with you in an email. So you will get those and then we will post the recording on the website. If you do have questions, you can drop those in the Q&A to be addressed by Michaela and Jen as we go along, or you can wait until the end so you don't miss anything as we're going over it. A lot of times your questions do get answered as we go through the slides. So let's dive in here. With pay by enrollment, there is no longer a number of hours that a child is required to attend per week. However, on 10/12, we are now offering a part-time option for CCDF children. This was developed out of a need that a lot of providers shared with us, that they had families who did not want to attend full-time 5 days a week, and they were accumulating a lot of absences. So part-time vouchers will be created for families who want to enroll 2 days per week. These are created by family choice at the time of reauthorization, and it will be reflected on the vouchers so that you can see it as a part-time voucher. So providers and families should discuss that option and decide what works best for them. If a part-time voucher is created, those vouchers will be reimbursed for 1/2 of the normal full-time rate. Then their other 3 days that week could be marked as off days. They do not have to be the same days each week. So that's a little bit of a change from how we were doing off days previously. However, if they're enrolled those 2 days and they miss one of the 2 days that they're enrolled, that would be marked as an absence. And then the other days would still be marked as their off days. Because you are still paid for the absence, you're still going to receive that part-time payment for the week. So that 1/2 payment, whether they attend 1 day or 2 days because of the absence. And if they happen to attend 3 days because they need that for a certain week, that's fine, but that voucher payment will not change. It will still be that half-time payment. Parents still have the option of full-time care regardless of their schedule. So full-time vouchers will be created for any families that are enrolled 3 or more days per week. If children are enrolled full-time, each time they miss a day, whether that's pre-planned or not, would be marked as an absence. The only exception to that is if a child is enrolled full-time but is missing the same day every week, then that day could be marked as an off day. However, the others would still be marked as absences. Oops, forgot to flip over. If a child is expected to attend Monday through Thursday, for example, they never attend on Friday, then that Friday is going to be marked as an off day. But if they're sick and they miss Thursday and Friday that week, Thursday is going to be an absence. Friday would be an off day. Both days are still going to be paid, but only one of those would count towards their excessive absence total. If a child's expected to attend Monday through Friday, then any time they miss, that's going to be marked as an off day. Those children should never have, those would be marked as an absence. Getting ahead of myself. Those children should never have off days. So a child that is expected to attend Monday through Friday on a full-time voucher is going to have absences each time they're out. A school-age child that attends before and after school will have a school-age voucher for before and after school. When those children are on school breaks, if they are at least one full week in duration, they will have what's called a school other voucher. So that tells us it's going to the increased rate because that child is on a break for that full week. So when you're looking at your vouchers in the system, you'll be able to see if they are set for break weeks or not. Both of those are considered full-time vouchers, whether it's school age or school other. And if there's just a single day off of school for a child on a school age voucher, there is no additional voucher payment for just that single day. Then I wanted to talk about a few of the medical conditions that may affect a child's vouchers. So the first is what we call medically fragile children. This is a child with a chronic medical condition or a long-term hospitalization that would cause them to miss an excessive number of days of childcare. If you have a child like that, the parent would submit paperwork from the doctor to the eligibility office, and then that would be sent to be reviewed by the policy consultant. That paperwork needs to detail the condition and the need for that child to miss additional days. If that is approved, that will pause the excessive absence total count and it will allow them to miss more than 40 days for that enrollment year. So it's not going to go back and take days off that they've already accumulated, but it will stop that from adding additional days. So if you look under your My Vouchers tab, where it has the child's name and date of birth and anniversary date, there's a little box there that says medically fragile. So if that child has been approved, that box will be checked and you will receive that notice. So it is important that parents are reporting that immediately. If they have a child that fits that category, they should not wait until they've accumulated a lot of absences or their vouchers are ready to terminate or have already terminated, because we can't go back and do all of those corrections. We want to know about that ahead of time. Children with a normal illness like COVID or the flu or hand, foot, and mouth, or even like short term hospitalizations like having their tonsils removed or getting tubes in their ears, those are not medically fragile. So those are just going to be marked as absences. Those are going to count in their normal 40-day total. The second type of medical condition that may affect vouchers would be for a special needs child. In this case, it may be a condition that does not affect the number of absences a child needs to have, but it's for a child who requires specific care and accommodations due to a disability or impairment that affects their daily functioning and their development. In this case, same scenario, parents should submit paperwork to the eligibility office to be reviewed by the policy consultant. They have several options here that they can turn in for that. So it could be their individualized education plan or IEP from the school. It could be paperwork from the First Steps program or the Social Security office if they're receiving SSI, or it could just be a letter from the doctor with that diagnosis on there. If those are approved, that child will be marked as special needs. And in those cases, an additional 10% would be added to the reimbursement rate on the child's voucher. If a child is special needs, they are only required to submit paperwork one time until a child turns 13 years old. So they would submit it, it would carry over through all of their voucher years. If a child still requires childcare vouchers after they turn 13, so if you're not aware, a child between the ages of 13 and their 19th birthday are eligible to continue receiving childcare vouchers if they are deemed special need. They would have to turn in annual documentation at each of their reauthorizations if they still need that. So children may be marked either medically fragile or special needs, or in some cases, they may be marked both, depending on the condition and the needs of the child. So the parent should discuss that with their eligibility office, and those can be reported at any time during their during their vouchers, so they do not have to wait for a reauthorization to turn that in. So if you have a child that's not categorized as one of those that you feel like needs to be, discuss that with the parents and they can get that paperwork turned in. Now I'm going to spend a few minutes going over the attendance codes again. There still seems to be a lot of confusion as to when to use certain codes, and we've made some minor changes here just to make it a little bit easier to understand. So if you are doing attendance in the provider portal, the setting will automatically show as P for present, Monday through Friday. If a child attends any amount of time during that day, that is more than them just signing in and signing out, because that is not considered present. So we did add a child must be present for at least a meal or an activity, some portion of that day to be counted as present. Then you would be able to leave that as a P. If that child was not present, then the provider would need to go in and update that to reflect either absent or off day before submitting their attendance. And then AB stands for absence. That's used anytime a child is regularly scheduled to attend but did not show up on that day. So it does not matter if it's pre-planned or not, vacations, sick days, emergencies, parents off work, any of those reasons are going to be an absence. Children are allowed 40 of those absences across all providers during an enrollment year. So keep in mind that means if a child changes providers within that enrollment year, they're still going to bring those absences from their previous provider with them. So make sure you're checking the child's absences in the portal, whether they're a new child or not. You will be paid up until that child reaches their 40th absence. Then after that, the vouchers will terminate at the end of the week containing the 40th absence. The system cannot see absences until attendance is submitted. So if providers are not submitting attendance every 2 weeks like they should be, then a termination may backdate. So if you're 4 weeks behind on submitting attendance and you turn it in and that child's 40th absence was 4 weeks ago, those vouchers are going to terminate back to the week that contained the 40th absence. Parents would be responsible for any care used after that termination date. So make sure that you are checking your children's absences. And if you have a child nearing their 40th absence, make sure you're discussing that with the parents. Off days would be used if a child is not regularly scheduled to attend. So as I mentioned earlier, if you have a child that is attending part-time, so they only are scheduled to attend Tuesday and Thursday, then you're going to mark the other 3 days that week as an off day. If you have a full-time child, you're not typically going to have any off days. Off days do not count against that 40-day excessive absence total. So keep that in mind. And then if you are using Brightwheel, a common question that we get is how to mark off days, because it's not an option in Brightwheel. So in that case, if you do not mark any absences or attendance for that day, then that would be recorded as an off day when you submit. Couple things to note here on off days, questions that have come up through the year. If a classroom is closed, but the entire program is not, so you're at a child care center, you have to close one classroom because of an illness or an emergency or staffing or whatever the reason, those children in that specific classroom should be marked as off days, not absences. We want to make sure that parents are not being penalized with an absence if they weren't given an opportunity to attend because that classroom is closed. Same situation if you have like a morning pre-K program and there's a 2-hour delay, so you don't run that program, but then the program is open the rest of the day for other children. Those children who were not allowed to attend in the morning can be marked as an off day. So those are the only times that those would function just a little bit differently. You should not be marking full weeks of off days. This indicates to us that vouchers may not be set correctly and may need to be adjusted. So if you find the need to mark full weeks of off days, please reach out to your policy consultant and see what you need to do to get those vouchers corrected. And then just a reminder, once you submit attendance, it is locked. So providers are not able to make any updates after they submit their attendance. But if you discover an error on that attendance submission, you can reach out to your policy consultant right away. They may still be able to make corrections as long as a payment hasn't been made. So just let them know. And then those errors can only be corrected for 60 days in the past. So if you have an error on attendance, you marked a child absent that wasn't supposed to be, and you need to get those credited back, or whatever those reasons are, please make sure you're reaching out to your policy consultant within 60 days so that we can get those corrected for you. So children are allowed 40 occasional absences across their enrollment year. An enrollment year is not a calendar year. So it starts on their anniversary date and ends on their anniversary date. So that could be different for every child. So that's why we use that term enrollment year. Parents and providers will receive notices after a child misses 10 days of attendance, then again at 20, 30, and 35 days. So there are 4 notices that go out before a termination. So if there's a problem, they think something's recorded wrong, or they, have a medically fragile child, or any of those things, as those notices are going out, that's the time to report that there are problems. Providers are still paid for those occasional absences, but the exception to that is this would not include multiple weeks in a row that are marked as absences for a child that is no longer enrolled. So keep in mind, vouchers do not cover a child's 2-week notice. You cannot have a child that leaves and then you just continue to mark them absent for a couple of weeks and then report that they leave. If we see that through our audit process, then we are going to ask you to have those funds recouped. Absence is reset at a child's anniversary date. So again, you can go into the provider portal, see what that anniversary date is. But keep in mind, those absences will not reset until the provider submits the attendance for that period that has the anniversary date in it. So for example, if you have a child that has an anniversary date today, 10/16, that is within the period that has not been submitted yet, because it does not end until Saturday. So once you've submitted attendance for this period, then that anniversary date would reset. It's not going to do it until you have submitted. So please don't wait to submit. Get those in, especially if you have a child that's close. Anniversary dates are different for every child, maybe even within the same family, because it's when that child began care, not necessarily when the case began. So it may not always match up with their reauthorization dates either. So make sure you're checking that for each child. And then again, remember that those absences count across all vouchers, all providers within that total enrollment year. So even if you've not marked any absences for that child, if they changed from another provider who already had multiple absences, you are going to see that as well. And then if you ever have a situation where absences do not reset correctly, which, occasionally will happen, then you may reach out to your policy consultant. If you don't know who that is, in the chat, not in the Q&A, but in the chat, I have dropped a number of important links that I will reference as we go. And that is one of the ones that I'll say a lot is reach out to your policy consultant. So the policy consultant map is linked in the chat. Provider changes should be sent to your eligibility office no later than Thursday at noon the week prior to the change. If a provider form is sent after that deadline, it may not be processed until the following week. It takes eligibility a little time to go through and get those processed. So last minute forms that come in may not be able to be processed. And just remember that care provided before a voucher starts or after a voucher ends is the responsibility of a family. So make sure you are checking to see when those changes are made before allowing a child to start your program. The start date should be indicated on your provider form, and it must be in the future. So if you do not fill out your form completely and you don't indicate a start date, it may delay the processing. So parents or providers can submit a provider form, but we do ask if the provider is the one submitting it, which is fine. But please, if you're emailing that to your eligibility office, copy the parent on it so they know that you have sent that. Many, many times we get provider forms for parents who've just come by for a tour, or they haven't fully enrolled in your program, or they're just thinking about maybe switching providers. And then the provider goes ahead and sends that. The parent's not aware of that, and it causes all kinds of issues because the vouchers have been switched when they should not have been. So by copying the parent on your email request, they're able to see that you've sent that provider form for them and what date was indicated. And then they can verify or deny that to eligibility so that those changes don't happen and require a lot more work. If you are sending a provider form for a school-aged child, we do ask you to include a school calendar so that eligibility can set the break weeks correctly. Parents can indicate which breaks they need, if any, for their child, because they do have the option of when and how they want to use breaks and even where they want to use breaks. So if your program doesn't offer breaks, but they need break vouchers at a different program, they can do that. So we just need that school calendar, and we need to know from either the provider or the parent if those breaks are going to be used. And then just remember, it is the provider's responsibility to check vouchers weekly in the portal, look for any updates, make sure there's no changes to your vouchers. If there is an error, that allows you to catch it early before any improper payments are made, and we can still make those changes in plenty of time. So roster cleanup. This is a big, big thing in our world. Providers must contact their eligibility office to make any roster updates within 5 business days. That is such an important date because by not waiting, it would allow us to make changes before a payment is made. Remember, we pay 3 weeks in arrears. So if you let us know that right away, then we can make any changes to the vouchers that are needed before payments come out. So this would include things like a child no longer attending your program. And again, make sure you're indicating the last day that they attended. If a child's start date changes, if they were supposed to start your program this past Monday, but now they're not going to start for 2 weeks, we will not make those payments for those first 2 weeks. So you need to let us know so we can adjust that and get the right start date on there. If a child enrolls but never attends your program, we know that happens. You're expecting them and then they just don't show up on the first day. Make sure that you are reporting that. And then lastly, if a child will be out for an extended period of time, so more than 2 consecutive weeks, and they should not have any vouchers assigned to your program, including things like summer break. That was a big thing we saw last summer, is that programs still had vouchers assigned over the summer when they should not. We do pay by enrollment, which means every 2 weeks that system is trying to process a payment if there's a voucher assigned. So if there should not be vouchers assigned, letting us know ahead of time so that those can be removed is really important. If a parent requests a gap in voucher, so they're going to be, gone for a month to, a custody situation or whatever it is. So they've requested a longer gap. You should discuss that with the parent and decide if it is better for them to use absences, which of course would mean that your payment would continue, but those would count against their 40 days. Or they can choose to have a gap, which means no attendance would need to be recorded, no payment would be made. However, that means with no payment coming in for the provider, they are not required to hold a spot without payment. So again, parents should be aware they may be responsible for the payment, or you may not hold their spot. So good conversation to have with the parent on which would be better. If they're only going to be gone 2 weeks, maybe, they just use absences. You still get paid. You hold the spot for them. There's no issues. However, if they're going to be gone for 2 months, it would not make sense for them to use those absences because their vouchers would terminate. So just having that conversation with your parents. We do have a roster cleanup form. This link is dropped in the chat as well. So if you are not using that, please do. That notifies eligibility immediately of any roster changes to your program. And then providers should be marking children as off days until they are removed from the roster, but this should not go on for more than 1 week. So if you have a child, you've sent that roster cleanup form and they do not get removed, please contact your eligibility office immediately and follow up on that request. So don't just continue to mark them off days because it will continue payments and then you will have to have those payments recouped from a future payment. Remember, you are still responsible for returning any improper payments even after the form has been submitted. So, please reach out to eligibility or to your policy consultant if the eligibility office is not completing those roster cleanups for you. And then just note, eligibility cannot update any vouchers in the past. So when you're sending those, they can only make changes to a future voucher. If this week has already begun or it's a past week, they can't do anything with those. They have to put in a ticket, and that goes to our tech team, who then would make the change manually on the back end. Usually takes about a week for them to get those changes completed. That's why you see a little bit of a delay if you're asking for anything in the past. And if a payment has already been made on a voucher, then we can't change that at all. So all we would be able to do then is go in and recoup the payment if it was in error, but the voucher would still remain. And then if you ever have a backdated voucher that is added to your program for a week after a payment has already processed, which we all know happens sometimes, then please make sure you're checking your payment details report and make sure you do get paid for that backdated week. And if you don't, make sure you're reaching out to your policy consultant and letting them know that you had an older voucher that was added and that you still need a payment added there. Going into provider closures, providers can enter, change, or delete closure dates in the past as long as the period has not been submitted yet. Or in the future. So remember, once you've submitted it, it's locked. You can't make changes, but you can still add future dates. Right now, you can do the remainder of 2025 and the first quarter of 2026. After January 1st, you'll be able to enter all of 26 and the first quarter of 27. So we always give you the ability to go forward just a little bit. You don't have to put them in advance. You can enter them as you go along, but if you want to go ahead and get those in and track how many you have the ability to do so. Providers do have to enter all of their closures in the provider portal, even if you are doing your attendance through a CCMS. So if you're using Brightwheel or Playground or ELV to do your attendance, you cannot enter closures through that CCMS. So you still need to go into your portal to do that. Once you have marked a closure, no attendance is required for that day. You'll see a red bar that will go across that entire date where the attendance would normally go for children, and it will indicate that you were closed. So please make sure you are not using off days when the program is closed. That's a common mistake we're seeing. Our auditors are seeing it a lot. If we see days that every child is marked as an off day, then that's an indication for us that the program was closed and that there may need to be some corrections to change that to a paid or a non-paid closure. So make sure you are not using off days if the entire program was closed. So there are two types of closures. There is PC or paid closure. Providers get 16 of those per calendar year. So those do run January 1st to December 31st and reset every January 1st. They don't roll over, so you only get 16 within that calendar year. Those are used for any reason a provider is closed. So holidays, vacations, sick days, emergencies, staff in service, inclement weather, whatever the reason you're closed, you would use one of those if you expect to get paid for that day. If you are closed for an entire week and you want to be paid for that entire week, then you would need to enter 5 paid closures to be paid for the full week. The second type is non-paid closures. In that case, that you would use those when you do not expect a full payment for the week. So we often see this when we have a school program that maybe is closed all during Christmas, or they're closed for all of spring break. And they don't charge families for those weeks, so they may want to use non-paid closures in those situations. Anytime a provider uses a non-paid closure, if it's not for the full week, then that week is prorated based on how many non-paid closures you use at a rate of 1/5 per day. So providers are able to choose when to use their paid and non-paid closures. So you are not required to use paid closures first. I know we've said that in some communications. That is our recommendation, so that if you're not sure if you're going to use all of them, we want those paid closures to be used first, but you choose when to use them. However, if you don't use all 16, we don't credit those back. So you can't say, oh, well, I only used 12, but I used some non-paid closures. Will you go back and add those as paid closures? We will not. Those will be forfeited. So if you're not sure, use your paid closures before your non-paids. And then if your program is closed for the day, please make sure that's noted on your backup attendance as well. Attendance has to be submitted within the 2 weeks following the attendance period. So for example, our current period ran through October the 18th. So this Saturday is the end of this current attendance period, which means you have until Saturday, November 1st at midnight for your on-time payment. So you can submit anytime within that 2 weeks. I always tell people start early. That way, if you have any problems, you have a little bit of time before that deadline. Attendance can be submitted through the provider portal or through your CCMS, so Bright Wheel Playground or ELV, if that's what you've indicated that you want to use as your submission method. If you receive an error message in your CCMS, that has to be cleared up before the attendance submission will go through. So if you hit submit and then you get an error about a missing child ID or a duplicate child or missing attendance, all of those things stop that attendance from going through. So you need to make sure that you verify everything, get those corrected, and then resubmit. If you are ever in question about whether or not that has gone through, you can log on to the provider portal, hit that absences tab, and there will be a date and time filled in on the far right, right under the red toolbar. If that's blank, that means your submission has not gone through and you will not get paid for that. And that updates whether you're entering attendance in the portal or through your CCMS. So anytime you're in doubt, I know sometimes providers will say, they had internet issues or things like that, and they're just not sure if it went through because maybe it was acting a little funny. Please log into the portal and just make sure that date and time is populated there, and that way you'll know that it went through for payment. We do pay a grace period payment for your first missed payment. So if you miss a submission, you will automatically be paid for that attendance period. However, if you don't submit because there was an error, like I said, we ran into that a lot last summer. Providers closed for the summer. There were still vouchers attended. There were still vouchers assigned. No children were attending, so they just stopped submitting. That can't happen because this will prevent you from ever being able to submit and get paid again until everything is caught up. So if you find an error and you're worried about submitting, reach out to your policy consultant, tell them you have an issue, and get that corrected instead of just stopping your submissions. If you miss 2 or more submissions in a row, then we do stop payment. We hold payments until you have submitted all of your missing periods. So first one, paid as a grace period. After that, we're going to hold them until everything is caught up. If you are missing attendance, then all of your admins that are listed in iLead should be receiving a daily reminder that it is time to submit. Those start 5 days prior to the due date. So as I mentioned, the 18th is the due date for this week. So on this past Monday, all of your admins, if your attendance was not submitted, should have been receiving a notice every day from 5 days before and every day until you submit that. So if you're 2 weeks behind, you should have gotten a lot of notices that you were behind. And then all providers should have access to their payment details through Tyler Tech. So this will just be one admin, the one who set up your banking, but they should be able to access details on which children were paid, which weeks they were paid for, any adjustments that were made. So if you don't know how to access your payment details, if you have not been looking at those every 2 weeks, please, again, reach out to your policy consultant and ask for the instructions. It's so important to be able to reconcile your payments and make sure you're getting the correct amounts for all of your children. So the new CCDF reimbursement rates took effect on 10/5, as most of you know. If you have not, you can log into the portal and look at your vouchers to see what those new payment amounts are. You won't see that reflected in your actual payments until November the 6th, because we do pay 3 weeks in arrears. So the payments have not caught up to those new rates yet. So you're still going to get the old rates for a little bit longer. And then in our FAQs that we sent out, there was a note there, those initial enrollment fee reimbursements for your new children that we were paying out yearly are now rolled into those new rates. So you will no longer be receiving a separate payment from the state for those enrollment fees. So make sure you are aware of that and collecting any fees from parents accordingly for your program. To break down the parts of the vouchers, so the first part is copays. Copays are calculated based on the gross monthly income for a family and the number of years they've been on the program. That copay is the same for the entire subsidy period unless a family submits a lower pay stub. So in that case, copays can be lowered during a subsidy period, but they will never increase until the next reauthorization. A note here is that copays are assigned to the youngest child in the family because typically they have the highest charges and they're going to be in care the longest. So if the copay is more than what the reimbursement rate is for that child, it will leave $1 subsidy payments for that child. And then any remaining copay would be moved to the next youngest child if there are other children for that copay to be dispersed to. So we get that question a lot, like, why am I only seeing a $1 payment on this voucher? What does that mean? And that just means that That $1 is serving as a placeholder to keep that child on vouchers, but the parent is paying the full amount of their care. So we only do that so that if there are changes to the voucher in the future, that child still has a voucher and the parent doesn't have to reapply and put that child back on the waiting list. So hopefully that helps understand some of those $1 subsidies that you might be seeing out there. And then the second part of that is an overage. So an overage is the difference between what you are charging as your provider rate and what the subsidy reimbursement rate is. Both copays and overages are the responsibility of the family and should be paid directly to the provider. So you can see here at the bottom of the slide, I put a little calculation that says the subsidy reimbursement rate plus the copay plus the overage should equal the provider rate. So if they don't have a copay, it would just be subsidy reimbursement rate plus overage equals provider rate. But if they have both, they are responsible for both. You may choose to waive your overages. Some providers ask that question. You may choose to waive your overages and not collect your full tuition. But, and you are able to do that because you are not required to charge the same amount to CCDF families as you are private pay. The only thing we ask is that you consistently apply that to your voucher families. So if you're going to, waive overages for one voucher family, you do it across the board. Getting into backup attendance. So backup attendance is required to be kept by all providers in addition to what is submitted in the portal. We've had a lot of questions around this. So it can be done through your CCMS. If you are using Bright Wheeler Playground or ELV for your attendance and the parent is the one checking that child in and out, not your program staff, not your teachers, then that can be your backup method. If not, if your program staff is the one that is checking in that child, or you have a different electronic tracking method or a paper attendance, those are all fine as well, but the parents must sign those at least weekly. So if you have a program that is providing transportation to a child, so parents aren't coming to your building, or the child comes directly from school to your child care, or your staff is the one that is checking that child in and out on your CCMS, then those records need to be printed and the parent needs to sign them at least weekly. So you need to figure out a way to do that. Remember, if you are using a CCMS, that system is going to track who signed that child in and out. So it will tell us if it was a parent or a teacher, and auditing will be looking at that. So please make sure that you are getting parent signatures if they are not the ones that are doing the attendance. This is required for both licensing and auditing, and you are required to keep those records for at least 3 years. I have had some questions if you weren't keeping a backup method prior to when pay by enrollment starts, or you weren't prior to today, or whatever, please start keeping those immediately. We don't expect you to go back and try to recreate things in the past that may or may not be correct, but please keep a backup method. If you are using a paper backup method, it does need to include the child's first and last name, the date of attendance, the time in and time out, and then either a parent signature or initials at least weekly. So make sure if you're using good old-fashioned paper that it does include all of those things. So we want to make sure it's not, it doesn't just say July across the top with some first names of kids. That's not going to be sufficient. Make sure you do have all of the information there. So what auditors are looking for is that your backup attendance must match what's entered in the portal for payment. If it does not match or it is not being kept, you may be required to repay all the funds that you've received for attendance claims, and or negative action may be taken against your license. So it is very important that you are keeping your backup attendance. Oh, I just realized I wasn't advancing slides. I am so sorry. Why is backup attendance needed? It allows families to see what the provider is submitting for their attendance and absences. It helps resolve any disputes between families and providers when disagreements arise about the number of absences claimed or the days attended. And it's the family's responsibility for receiving the benefit of vouchers. Now that they're not swiping, we have to have them be responsible for making sure that their child is checked in and out accurately, whether they're doing that on their CCMS, using the app there, or through another electronic tracking or paper system. As I mentioned, auditors are looking at attendance records. Food program menus do not count for that because they don't have all the required info and a parent signature. So when they're looking for those backup methods and requesting those, we want to make sure that it has all of the required information on it. And then just a reminder on your shifts, providers cannot enroll more than their licensed capacity on either shift. So this includes both vouchers and private pay. Shift 1 is 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Shift 2 is 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Children assigned to shift 2 cannot be present before 6 p.m. or after 6 a.m. If they need times that overlap those times, then they would be assigned to both shifts and use a spot on both. So if a child comes in after school, they're there at 3 o'clock and they stay until 7 o'clock, they cannot be just a shift 2 child. They would be shift 1 and shift 2 because they are there before 6 p.m. So we do get a lot of questions about that. I wanted to make sure to put that in there. It is fraud, or what we refer to as an intentional program violation, or abbreviated IPV, to falsify attendance records or keep payments for children that were not attending. So it is the provider's responsibility to make sure that attendance records are accurate, and that if you receive any payments that you should not have, that those get returned to the state. We understand that mistakes happen. Report those to your policy consultant. They'll take steps to get those corrected, which may include, going back and correcting the attendance or correcting closures that were marked incorrectly or recouping those improper payments. But we just want to make sure that those get taken care of right away, because if there are issues that are found through audit, providers can lose their ability to accept CCDF or On My Way if they do have an IPV, or they may have a negative action taken against their license. So these are very serious. And then lastly, all providers that have received a payment from the state in 2025 will receive a 1099 for their taxes. 1099s will include all payments, not just voucher payments. So if you got a PTQ incentive or a grant payment or anything else from the state, those will all be included in a single 1099. They will be provided by Tyler Technologies this year and will be available by the end of January 2026. We are confirming with them if those are going to be electronic or mailed, so we should have that information to you soon. I will put that out in the Monday Must Know newsletter as soon as we have that information. So if you're not currently receiving our newsletter, please get signed up. The link is in the chat and it will be in the email that you receive. That contains all of the latest news from OE Castle. So highly recommend everybody make sure that you're getting that and following that. If you still need a 1099 from a previous year, so anything other than 2025, please reach out to your policy consultant for instructions on how to get those. We did change payment vendors last year, so you may have to contact one or the other depending on what you still need. And then finally, I will just wrap up by saying thank you all for being here and giving up part of your evening. We will continue to answer questions in the Q&A if there are any of those, or Jen and Michaela, if there's anything that you saw that we need to call out and discuss live, you can let me know those. And then, of course, after this call, if you have any questions or need any additional support, you can reach out to the OE Castle Child Care Support Line, which is that same number, 1-800-299-1627. And they are happy to answer all of those questions for you. And again, this is being recorded, so we'll make sure that the recording gets posted on the FSSA website as soon as we're able to. But I will email you out a copy of the slides as well as all of the links that were shared, so that if you need to access any of that information, you will have that handy. And then we'll leave it open a couple more minutes here if anybody has any additional questions. But if not, thank you so much for being here. And just let us know if there's anything we can do to support.
Hey, Shannon, there was a question about if these resources will be going out in Spanish.
That is a great question. We would have to get them translated. They're not available at this time, but we can see what we can do to get those taken care of.
Thanks.
See a few questions still coming in, so we will continue to get those answered.
Shannon, could you just go over backup attendance for schools or any sites that may not have parents dropping off or picking up the children?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you've got, kids that are coming off the bus, or you're providing transportation to and from home, or any of those kind of things, you just want to make sure at least weekly that there is a written document for that parent to sign. So if you're printing that from your CCMS, or you're printing that from another electronic system like the school systems use, or ProCare, or one of those, or if you have your paper attendance method, you just want to make sure that you have that available. The parents can see what you've submitted and that they sign off on that they agree with those. I see a great question in the Q&A now. It says, if our rates are lower than what the CCDF rate is, so collecting the copay would cause the family to pay more than the private pay rate, do you have to charge the full copay? That answer is no. That can be determined in individual programs. Again, we just ask that it's consistently applied to families, so that you're not saying, I'm going to waive the copay for this family, but not this family. So if that's the case, then that's fantastic, and you do not have to charge those. I see they're still answering some questions coming in. All right, I am not seeing any more open questions. So if you don't have anything else, oh, a couple more still popping in. But I was just going to remind you, after this webinar, please feel free to reach out to your policy consultant. Those are your support networks. They are there for every program. So if you have not been in touch with your policy consultant, they are fantastic and they will help you with your issues, whether that's with parents, with vouchers, with your eligibility office, anything you're having problems with, please reach out to them for those supports. That's what they are there for. And make sure that you get your questions answered, or again, reach out to the OE Coastal Child Care Support Line for any general questions at that 1-800-299-1627. And then expect an email from me with all of the slides. Apologies for the little glitch in the middle where I didn't advance one of those, but that I will get you the full slides as well as all of the links that we shared in the chat. Ms. Taylor, I see you're asking how to find out who your policy consultant is. If you look in the chat, the very first link that I shared there in the chat goes to the policy consultant map, and it will have the contact information for your policy consultant. So please make sure that you are familiar with that and that you're able to get that, you reach out to them for any help. I think we're just about at time, so I appreciate everybody being here. If your question did not get answered or you need additional information, feel free to reach out to your policy consultant, or you can respond when I email you with those links tomorrow if there's any other clarifications that you need, and I'm happy to answer those for you.